spring of 1942, the German army once again proved that their doctrine of combining mobile ground units and supporting air forces was the key to victory, even against a numerically superior enemy force. General Erwin Rommel had only 561 tanks on hand compared to over 900 for the British forces. But the Desert Fox overcame this disadvantage with superior tactics and executed the German strategy brilliantly.
He thoroughly understood the concept of using armored warfare. When the Italians got into trouble in North Africa, the Germans realized they were going to do something about it. So they sent Rommel in there with his Africa Corps to try to rescue the Italians who had already been beaten down by the British.
He realized that warfare in the open, unpopulated desert required a slightly different set of rules. As far as Rommel was concerned, there was always a flank to be turned, as mobility and firepower took on a heightened sense of importance.
Rommel was able to encircle and develop the British, and on these long runs, he just drove all the way back to El Alamein, which was not too far from Cairo.
Axis infantry units engaged the British forces in order to keep the Allied units pinned down behind their defensive line. This left the German tanks free to sweep around the British southern flank, and the panzer units were soon well to the rear of the opposition's static defense line, ready to cut off the forward British troops from their supplies and reinforcements. The British operated as scattered armored units, while the German and Italian forces fought in cohesive formations under central control, supported by the Luftwaffe. In addition, when the Allied armor units did attack in larger formations, they often employed a traditional British cavalry maneuver, charging straight at the enemy, line after line. Given such easy targets, the German tanks, anti-tank gunners, and dive bombers cut down a great number of Allied armor.
Fortunately, the British were able to bring in reinforcements, and there was a place just south there called the Quatara Depression, which was a big open, kind of like something I guess you compare it to something like the Grand Canyon in this country. It was just a big open depression, just an insurmountable barrier as far as tanks and motorized troops are concerned.
This time, there would be no flank to maneuver around.
Well, fortunately, Montgomery came in there with his 8th Army and was able to build up sufficiently. So he had tremendous artillery power and tremendous infantry armor superiority over Rommel. And then, of course, by that time, the American army had landed in Casablanca and in Morocco. And so the American army came in from the west, and the British driving the east, and finally Rommel was caught in a trap. And the German army collapsed and was captured. Despite Rommel's eventual fall, the battles in North Africa validated some basic doctrinal principles which still applied some 50 years later in Operation Desert Storm. The combination of local air superiority with mobile armor and infantry units under central control can lead to victory even when outnumbered. But if the battles in North Africa represented an early version of effective airland doctrine, the Allied invasion of Italy at the Anzio beachhead came to symbolize an ineffective battle plan and missed opportunities. In January of 1944, the Allies made an amphibious assault at Anzio, 20 miles southeast of Rome, in an attempt to cut off German communication and supply and break the deadlock in Italy. The landing itself was quite successful.
The amphibious forces had achieved complete tactical surprise with 90% of the assault force ashore after the first day. There was virtually no enemy resistance, and the forward units had soon reached their first inland objectives. But instead of continuing forward and exploiting their advantage, the armies were ordered to wait until the entire landing force was ready to move out. This delay gave German leaders a chance to maneuver their armies into position. What resulted was 4 months of bitter fighting, battles of attrition similar to the Western Front in 1917. Winston Churchill captured the essence of the Allied failure at Anzio when he said, "We thought we had hurled a wildcat ashore. All we got was a stranded whale." But the Allies learned from their mistake in Italy. Dawn on June 6, 1944, intense airstrikes and naval bombardments of the Atlantic Wall provided cover for the invasion of Normandy, Operation Overlord. The Allies were now on the offensive as the historic move across Europe began. The Allies, in fact, were basically following German doctrine as they combined aerial and infantry support of armored units. Like the Blitzkrieg, the Allied advance would depend on communication, mobility, and firepower. However, the Normandy region of France, covered in a patchwork maze of thick hedgerows, would present an immediate problem to the Allied advance. Eventually, though, an inventive American soldier created a hedge-chopping attachment which was fitted onto the front of tanks.
These hedge choppers, you put them in front of the tank, the hedge choppers so low the Germans couldn't see which tanks had hedge choppers, which ones didn't. And we could break through those hedgerows, and instead of breaking through, say, maybe 1 or 2 places, we could break through 10 places simultaneously, so it became an extremely effective weapon.
The armor units could finally advance effectively, and the Allies were poised to make a more rapid advance at the Battle of Saint-Lô.
The breakthrough at St. Lo will probably go down in history as probably one of the most significant battles of all time, because this is the first time that large masses of air power and artillery and infantry and armor were all coordinated together on such an extremely narrow front against such an extremely difficult target. The plan was to break up and envelop the German army on their western flank. To break through effectively, we had to be able to destroy the German reserve. Unless we could destroy those reserves in the rear and prevent a counterattack, we weren't going to break through that hedge without tremendous cost. The attack started out with a heavy bombardment. The first flight came with 900 B-26 bombers. Just as far back as you see were planes. We realized that once the breakthrough started, the armor was going to move, we hoped, very rapidly. And the infantry would not be able to keep up with them. And therefore, the flanks of the armored division were going to be exposed for maybe 3 or 4 hours. And until the infantry could get up and seal off these flanks, they assigned the Air Force a mission to create a bomb line. And any time the Germans tried to cross that bomb line, to attack them. Our division moved through the gap after the infantry got through and cleared the line. C Company pulled over in the field to the right and went over to the edge of the bomb line. Unfortunately for us, just as we pulled in this damn field, a German tank and a German infantry group started to attack. Each artillery battery had a liaison officer from the Air Force. So he just picks up a damn radio and gives them our coordinates and tell them we're being attacked and overrun by some German tanks and to come in here and get the hell in there in a hurry. Here came these 2 P-47s, and they came screaming in at a real low altitude. I mean, they were less than 1,000 feet. And they started firing those machine guns over our head, and I saw those bombs let go, and I looked up there and I said, damn, those bombs are going to land right in our area. I mean, they let those bombs go at least 300 or 400 yards on the other side of us. Because the air pilots knew exactly what they were doing. And those bombs arched over the top, were over the top of our trucks and landed about 50 yards on the other side of our trucks in that field. There were bogey wheels, there were tracked, there were German helmets, there were rifles, there was all kinds of wheels and stuff flying through the air. It saved our day. The effect of the bombing completely obliterated the Germans. I don't know how many thousands of Germans were killed in that thing. I just have no idea. With the heavy air bombardment of the hedge choppers, we lost 2 tanks. Prior to that, trying to go 8 miles in the hedgerows, we'd lost 87 tanks. That was the difference between the air bombardment and the heavy artillery and the hedge choppers. I think that's what made the difference.
The Americans were quickly becoming proficient at the rapid movement of a combined group of arms. ground, and air forces working as one incredibly cohesive fighting unit. General Patton and Field Marshal Rommel exploited the potential of the technology they had at their command. The strategy and tactics they employed rewrote the book on land warfare and certainly lived up to Napoleon's declaration that the art of land warfare is an art of genius, of inspiration. However, the advances in doctrine that were made in World War II would not necessarily apply to the United States' next conflict in Korea.
The greatest threat, literally, with the rapid demobilization after World War II was that we retained cohesive combat forces. When the forces were employed in Korea, the initial forces were not well trained, not manned to full strength, not fully equipped, had basically come out of occupation forces that were stationed in Japan and were defeated. And it was a very, very serious concern.
In addition, the UN forces were extremely outnumbered after the communist surprise offensive. Just 3 understrength U.S. Army divisions were on the ground in the early stages of the war, and they soon found themselves backed into the southeast corner of the Korean peninsula, defending the harbor at Busan. The mountainous terrain made mobile combined arms maneuvers almost impossible. Because the terrain presented a formidable challenge to the ground troops, effective support from the air was even more essential. Jet aircraft, which had emerged at the end of World War II, were now employed in large numbers. Forward air controllers on the ground called in increasingly accurate and lethal air strikes, allowing greater coordination between air and ground forces. The Korean conflict also marked the dawning of a unique union of air and ground forces. The helicopter demonstrated the ability to move ground forces over terrain features and place them behind the enemy or on its flanks. But the actual number of helicopters available was relatively small, and the development of airmobile tactics was still in its early stages.
There was innovation that was beginning during that period. For example, what will helicopters be used for? Will helicopters be armed? What have you? This, of course, led to the innovation that was the Air Assault Division, which had just basically completed its development when we started into Vietnam.
When the pilots of the 101st Airborne Division whirled away from the deck of the USS Iwo Jima in 1965 to their base in South Vietnam, they foreshadowed the role of the helicopter not only as a weapon, but as the symbol of the United States operations in Vietnam.
The situation in Vietnam was not as much an inadequacy of innovation or technology. It was more a situation where the American Army at the time was learning the process of counterinsurgency or combating revolutionary war.
The helicopter had truly come of age, and air mobile tactics, including the use of newly formed air cavalry units, proved to be quite effective. A considerable number of troops could now be placed anywhere they were needed on the battlefield, regardless of the terrain. Artillery would assist them from fire support bases located throughout the country. But in most cases, after the fighting was over, the troops would head back to their base camps, and the enemy, which had been beaten back, was now free to return to their original positions. Despite American technological superiority, military planners in the Army did not develop an effective battle doctrine to counter the guerrilla tactics of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army. There was no front to break through, no flank to maneuver around, no clear battle lines at all. One thing was certain, though. Technology alone could not win a war. A clearly defined battle doctrine was essential for victory. As the U.S. Army struggled to leave behind the memory of Vietnam, it was clear that reorganization was needed and future goals needed to be set. With decreased defense spending, the Army would need to become smaller, yet at the same time more efficient. Against a numerically superior Soviet force, the U.S. Army needed to be prepared to fight outnumbered and wind. As the rebuilding began, 5 weapon systems in particular were targeted as being essential to the execution of the emerging airland doctrine. The tank was the undisputed king of land warfare, and therefore received top priority among the Big Five, as they had come to be known. The M1 Abrams eventually replaced earlier models as the Army's new main battle tank. Likely to operate against a larger force, mobility, protection, and firepower took on added importance. Lightweight Chatham armor meant that the Abrams, at 45 miles per hour, was fast enough to outmaneuver most enemy tanks while still protecting its highly trained crew. The Arab-Israeli conflict had demonstrated the effectiveness of infantry operating alongside the tanks. Therefore, the M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle was developed as the companion vehicle to the M1 Abrams. The Abrams and the Bradley give the Army a tactically capable, well-protected, and highly lethal armored force. The AH-64A Apache attack helicopter was designed to give the Army additional anti-armor capability in order to defeat larger Warsaw Pact tank forces. The Apache is highly maneuverable. It can fly close to the ground day or night, and it is more survivable against enemy fire than earlier models. To complement the new attack helicopter, the UH-60A Black Hawk utility helicopter was developed. It can transport an 11-man infantry crew or a 105mm howitzer and its crew and ammunition. The Black Hawk is faster and quieter than earlier models, and combined with the Apache, gives the Army a potent force designed to outmaneuver a more powerful enemy. The 5th of the Big Five weapon systems is the Patriot air defense missile. It is compact and more mobile than previous air defense systems and can be operated by a smaller crew. Its anti-missile capabilities have become well known, but its main objective is to assist the air forces in achieving air superiority, which is vital to the success of air-land battle. Air superiority allows airland to win the deep battle behind the front lines, where communication and command centers can be disrupted, enemy reinforcements can be weakened before reaching the front line, and supplies can be delayed or destroyed. The Big Five, as well as other recently developed weapons systems, were designed to execute the close and deep battle requirements of airland doctrine. When combined with highly trained, volunteer soldiers, all working to achieve the goals of airland battle, the U.S. Army has all the ingredients for victory.
For the first time, doctrine has essentially led the development process. In other words, we decided how it was that we wanted to fight in the future, airland battle, and then we developed everything else to make it fit that concept and then that doctrine.
But even the best laid plans still need to be validated by actual experience. The 1989 invasion of Panama provided an early indication of airland's potential. However, Operation Desert Storm represented the true culmination of airland battle doctrine. Years of weapons procurement, training, and tactical planning would now come to full fruition. An important goal of airland battle is to be prepared to win the first battle of the war, something the U.S. has regularly failed to do in previous wars. Aided by 6 months of undisturbed supply and troops buildup, the coalition forces were poised to strike. In order to minimize potential casualties for the U.S. and to keep the Iraqi army off balance, the air forces began an intensive campaign primarily targeting vital elements of the deep airland battlefield. Enemy command facilities were bombed, as well as communication centers, bridges, aircraft hangars, weapons plants, and reserve units. The incredible accuracy of smart munitions was a far cry from the saturation bombing runs of World War II. As the ground war began, the true integration of air and land forces occurred as planned. The armored units, with infantry and tanks side by side, sped forward, protected by attack helicopters in the sky. Artillery prepared the way, engineers breached the Iraqi defenses, and fighters controlled the skies as the fast and powerful U.S. forces executed their Hail Mary sweep. The land battle is rapidly becoming more complex and technologically oriented. Using weapons of even greater sophistication, revolutionary changes are approaching, and as a result, the form and the shape of a future battlefield is difficult to predict. It is certain that no single weapon system can be fielded to cope with all the battlefield's requirements. So only through teamwork and cooperation between the armed forces can weaknesses be overcome and victory won.
No próximo programa, os paraquedistas.